Good evening. My name is Taifa Butler, and I am the president of Dēmos. Thank you all so much for joining us for this fireside chat to discuss It's Not You, It's Capitalism by the renowned, wonderful author, Malaika Jabali. We are going to get into it, but I first want to ground you in this conversation that we're going to have today. For those of you who don't know Dēmos, we are a think tank, a research policy organization that we've been working for the last 23 years to actually build a just, inclusive, multiracial democracy and economy. And as part of our work to build this just, inclusive, multiracial democracy and economy, we have always done work at the intersection of democracy, economic justice. And as we think about what is needed to build the multiracial economy and democracy that we need, we understand that we have to go through the path of racial justice and racial equity because of how these systems have been set up. And so when we think about us as a think tank and a research-based organization that really focuses on the Dēmos, Dēmos is the root word of democracy, and it means the people. So as we do this work, as we leverage our relationships with movement organizations at the state level and the national level, as we leverage our research and our policy ideas and solutions, our deep relationship with movement organizations, our strategic communications, and our litigation work over the last 23 years, we know and understand in order to have real systems change, in order to remake our democracy and our economy, we have to center Black and Brown people who have been the most marginalized, who have been historically excluded from these systems of our democracy and economy. And part of the challenge that we face today is capitalism. And that brings us into this conversation. And when we think about the economy that we deserve and that we need, where everyone has an opportunity to have economic security and mobility and to actually thrive in our system, we know that corporations and wealthy oligarchs have an outsized influence in our economy. And that has led itself to unchecked economic inequality, income inequality. It's led itself to a gap when you think about wealth between racial, ethnic, and groups. And so what do we need to do to actually remake and reform our economy so that everyone has an opportunity to thrive and reach their potential? We're going to get into that conversation today. And I'm so pleased that as an organization like Dēmos, who's been doing this work at the intersection, we know that economic and political power are inextricably linked. And in order for us to build this inclusive society, inclusive economy, we are going to have to build economic and political power for those who've been left out. And so part of this is how to reimagine our economy, given that it is driven by capitalism. And so what I want to do now is invite Malaika Jabali into this conversation. She is the senior, welcome.
I got excited. I'm going to let you finish.
She is the senior news and policy editor for Essence and the new author of this great piece called It's Not You, It's Capitalism. And so, Malaika, I am so pleased to join you as we think about what you've laid out in this piece to actually help us get rid of this boo that we have been joined at the hip with for so long and actually reimagine what's possible. So
I'm so excited to be with you and to be with our viewers streaming with us. I just love technology. We don't have to do this in person. You can be in your bathroom watching this right now. So I hope folks are tuning in.
That's right. And we'll have this on record. So someone can, if you couldn't make it live today for the conversation, you can join us via the recording. And we will archive it on our YouTube channel and our social media and also on our website. So Malaika, let's just get into it. Why this book? Why now? And as you have come to this work as a journalist who was a former organizer and has worked in sort of the litigation, the legal space, kind of what was your impetus for creating this piece?
Two primary things: anger and determination, which I feel have motivated me for most of my life. So I have been angry about seeing so many people suffer for so long, seeing us misdiagnose the problems, seeing us stuck in a toxic relationship, seeing the fact that you can have 10% of people in this country own 70% of the wealth, seeing the pervasiveness of homelessness in a place like Atlanta, where I'm from, which is the so called Black Mecca. And you have this kind of income inequality. Atlanta has the highest income inequality in the country. America is supposed to be the richest country in the world. And yet we have so many people who are indebted. 50% of the country is rent burdened. In the richest country in the world, half of people in where we live cannot afford expenses after paying their rent. And so I don't think it is right for people who can have a voice, who have resources, to be quiet and not say something about it. And I've been determined to try and do something with that knowledge. I was a public policy attorney. And so one of the last papers, one of the last pieces of research we did was on the homelessness crisis in New York City. And so in a place like New York City, which is the birthplace of Wall Street, I was down the street. I worked a couple of blocks away from Wall Street, the financial center of the world, which is built on the bones of enslaved Black people. Right around the corner is the African burial ground, where our ancestors' labor built up the economy of New York City. So all of those things kind of blended together, where it's like, okay, this is real serious and heavy, but I guess I got to laugh through the pain. So I wanted to make it approachable for people as well and fun. And there's rom-com references that I would love to talk about. If people need to know what some of the references are, we can hash that out too. I
I
can't hear you. There
oh,
we go.
okay. I thoroughly enjoyed how you laid this piece out. And I think when we talk about the economy and economic policy, sometimes we approach this from a very dry, way to think about defining the problem and what are the obstacles and what are the solutions. But you really brought some of the culture into this piece, and really made it a fun read, but a serious moment, as we think post COVID, post the George Floyd moment that we're living in. And oftentimes when we've seen these moments of economic recovery after financial crises, the ability for Black and brown, low wealth, low income, poor families to be able to recover, it is typically slower, right? And the type of interventions that are provided to help those families who are most harmed by those crises, don't last, right? They may be very short interventions, but we don't think about the long tail of some of these challenges. And that's where we are right now. I think some of the federal interventions with the Inflation Reduction Act and ARPA, the American Rescue Plan, those types of interventions which solved poverty for children by providing the child tax credit and some of these other kinds of ready interventions, they helped, but there's not political will to continue those kinds of interventions. And I think we also understand why, right? And so I want you to talk a little bit about what you saw in this piece as we were talking about breaking up with capitalism. What are the promises that we are typically provide, or given, in terms of why capitalism is supposed to be the solution for us?
We get little makeup gifts, we get flued out, we get wined and dined, but it comes at a cost. And it often comes at a cost to our health. If you are able to glean any benefits from the relationship, you probably, something that I talk about in the book, you probably have to work really long hours in order to get the benefits of that relationship. You might have to work multiple jobs, as many people do in this country. And Black women are more likely to work more than one job right now, based on current statistics. And so we are fighting to just survive, and we're not necessarily thriving for a lot of us. Some of us who we look like we're thriving, we still have debt. So we know that Black women have the most student loan debt in the country, and there is over $1.4 trillion in student loan debt. And it has increased sevenfold from 1995 to 2017. Student loan debt has increased sevenfold. And so we think that this is just the way that things are supposed to be. And we think that it's our fault, that it's something that we're doing wrong. And so we just keep fighting, like, okay, I gotta hustle then. I gotta find another job. I gotta, make my bae feel good. And like, I'm not looking at any other options. I can't look at socialism over here, which I am one. I can't look at any other options because they're gonna get jealous. They're gonna get mad. They're going to talk bad about me. They might take away some of those benefits. So I have to stay committed to this, thinking that something is going to change. But we have had this system for 300 years, about 300 years. Black people have been oppressed through all of that. And we're not seeing those changes. In fact, we're seeing the kind of economic inequality that rivals the Gilded Age, just the Great Depression. We're seeing more income inequality than we did during the slave era. So when is the relationship actually going to get better? And so I'm just saying, I'm hitting up the group chat and I'm like, yo, are we going to consider something else now? I'm tired. I'm tired of having to give you the same rundown every time you come crying to me, every time there's a recession, every time there's a depression,
Yes. And I love, your point again, like for the approach to this is that capitalism is catfishing us, right? It's presenting something that is totally false and not true just to try to draw us in. And I think this idea, and we talk about sort of this post-neoliberal world that we're in where, it has been very focused on individual responsibility and smaller government and smaller public policy intervention and let the market do its thing because it ultimately is going to save the day. And we know that ain't it. Right. And so I loved your piece. In your piece, we often talk about, and, I've been in a policy think tank space for over 2 decades now, and we've problematized. We know what the problems are, right? We've defined them very well. Income inequality is bad for our economy and is bad for our democracy. And so we have to address it. But we oftentimes, I think, look at this individual personal responsibility framework for, people's lot in life. This is why they can't, have nice things. This is why they can't thrive in our economy because it's something that they've done. And I think, again, the 350 plus years you talk about is the long tail of exploitation that we continue to see, not only for Black and Brown people, but our economy also chose winners and losers, right? They chose people based on some human hierarchy of roles and skin color. If you had melanated skin, you were devalued. Depending on the job that you held, whether it was ag or domestic, that was valued less. And so we are still living with that devaluing in our society, and we gave much more value to the landowner and the colonizer and the land thief, I should say, quite honestly, right? Right. So that is still what we're navigating. So I guess for you, as those of us who've been doing economic justice work and trying to reform our economy, it's like, oh, well, if we just address the racial wealth gap and make sure that Black and Brown folks have more wealth or more capital or more assets, right? Or we can upskill folks so that they get higher skills, can get higher jobs. Why isn't that going to solve it?
Right. Those policy prescriptions, just saying, why don't we just do X, Y, and Z? It's doing a lot of work, to just close the racial wealth gap. Do you know how much that takes, given how large the racial wealth gap is? Considering the fact, for instance, just take this one wealth gap. One of the ways that we frame economic mobility and being able to achieve the American dream is being a business owner, having your own enterprise. Let's say we want to get out of being a worker. We want to have the opportunity to be the next Bill Gates or Elon Musk. And we're not really aware of just how much money that takes. When you look at the histories of the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world and the Donald Trumps of the world, they were able to get small $1 million loans from their families. If you look at the median net wealth of Black families right now, it's $34,000. The median household wealth of an entrepreneur, somebody who identifies as being self-employed on their taxes, is $300,000. So they have 10 times the median wealth that the median Black family has. So what will it take for us to get 10 times more wealth? If we're being discriminated against at the banks, if many of us can't get to college, if many of us don't have the kind of access and networks from being considered second-class citizens, if regarded as citizens at all, if you're regarded as subhuman for most of your ancestors' history, what kind of networks, what kind of wealth, what kind of access do you have to even get $300,000 to then try and achieve the American dream to have a successful business? And then we know how frequently businesses, enterprises, startups fail. So you're asking us to put all of our hopes on something that rarely happens. There is one Black person in the Forbes, I want to say 400, the wealthiest people in the world. One Black person out of 400 people, and he's a Nigerian concrete magnet. Not the Jay-Z is not on that list. Oprah's not on that list. We know we cover them at Essence. We love to see Black excellence. None of them have made it there, even though these are the promises we've made to ourselves for hundreds of years that it's possible. So I'm saying maybe we shouldn't be hinging on something that has proven to be improbable. Some people can keep trying it, and they are. I'm just asking us to think about another alternative because it has not happened yet.
Yes, yes. And so, you were very forthcoming in I'm a socialist, and I know people, we use these ideological terms, capitalism, socialism, Marxism, and communism, like all these things. But you lean into it in this book as a different framework and ideology of like why it is a better way than our relationship to capitalism. And I think, what you underscore in this book about the world of capitalism has created global poverty, imperial violence, unchecked climate change, and depleted natural resources, rising homelessness, inequality that is worse now than you said a century ago. So when we see these kinds of receipts, right, and this is this is part of what we get in a relationship, it almost makes it a no-brainer that we should walk away and break up with capitalism. But what do you see is the alternative? Because I think people are afraid to actually dismantle and walk away, as you say in the book.
I try and concede in the book that I don't believe there is one alternative. I think that we should be trying as many options as we can. And even within the book, a lot of the solutions aren't socialist, like orthodox solutions. Like they're a mix of all kinds of progressive ideas that we just need to commit to. And so I think the ultimate vision that I have and other Black people before me have had, from Martin Luther King to Malcolm X to Fred Hampton to Angela Davis to Kathleen Cleaver, so many of our Black liberation struggles were built on having a socialist economy. So I align with this vision where essentially we're having a workplace democracy. We believe that fewer decisions need to be in the hands of a few people who have all this enormous wealth and all of this incentive to be greedy and to pocket profits and spread among workers. So that's really what socialism is. It is a workplace democracy. And in the interim, until we can get workers who are empowered to make decisions and to decide how profits are shared in a company, I think we need to invest more in public housing. I think we need to have public banks. I think we need to have a government that actually works for the people and put people over profits. I think we need to have participatory democracies. So these are all the different options that I explore, and It's Not You, It's Capitalism, among many. And there are a lot of bright thinkers who are working, and there's a table of resources as well. I have a little QR code in there where you can see the other ideas that people have come up with. And again, as a policy attorney, I wanted it to be solutions oriented. I didn't want to just make people mad, even though that works for me. Like if I can get mad at something, I'm like, what can I do next? So that's the way that I framed it. I gave you all the stats to make you upset. And then once you get to the final chapter, it's like, okay, well, what I got to do? So I'm trying to recruit people to think more about what they can do.
Thank you for that. What has been, and we're going to bring in our Director of Economic Justice in on the conversation shortly, but given the resources and the solutions that you offer, there is no silver sort of solution, one thing fits all, one size fits all. There's I think a host of interventions that we have to make, because as we think about capitalism and all the different systems that have come together to create the kind of inequality and exclusion, to your point, the housing market, the financial systems and banking market, the labor market, and the labor laws that have also perpetuated a lot of the inequality that we see. So we've got to reform all of those to actually make this thing work. I mean, so I know you've been on your tour and you've been talking to a lot of people. What's been resonating with people the most about the book?
I think the fundamental idea that there is something else out there. I think there's a lot of hopelessness, and I think capitalism is intentionally hopeless. It is nihilistic, I think, by nature. It is bent on violence. And so when there is another option that's normalized, I think it gives people an aha moment. And it allows us to reimagine something better when we've been taught that there isn't anything else, at least in the United States. And so, I get very specific questions like on the tours, like, okay, well, if I'm a business owner, then are there ways for me to actually like to make this work? Like, how can I share profits with my workers? Like, well, here's some information about cooperatives. These are some ways that we have done it in the past, like Fannie Lou Hamer. There's a whole book about cooperatives right now. So I think people are getting it. I see the neurons firing, and then they're like, okay, what's the next step? So that's been really exciting for me, is folks just genuinely engaging with the work and realizing, okay, like this, okay, I've been gaslighted, so I can find something else.
That's great. I mean, and going back to the Black capitalism, rainbow capitalism point we talked about earlier about how to work within the construct, you said there are other solutions that people are thinking, okay, what can we do? But I also want to go back to sort of where we are living in this moment right now, post the affirmative action case with SCOTUS, right? And how we know and understand by and large that the affirmative action in higher education was to address the historic exclusion of people of color in higher education, because we said then that education was the great equalizer. Giving people an opportunity to get an education, get higher education, helps them, in fact, be able to get the skills and knowledge and compete in the marketplace. And that gives them the ability for upward mobility. But now, post the SCOTUS decision, you see these kinds of attacks on these DEI, efforts to really try to address the exclusion that we've seen in the marketplace. The Fearless Fund in Atlanta, for example, is coming under attack because it is a fund for Black business owners for a $10,000 grant. Can we just talk about like the minuscule amount, but it was an effort to provide more capital for Black-owned businesses, because why? They have been excluded out of these capital markets and financial systems. So what do you think, given where we are now with sort of people clutching their pearls around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and us really trying to lean in and talk about racial equity right now when it comes to our economy? How do we push through that and make the cases you have with the math and the facts that this is necessary and critical, and we can't shy away from it?
I think to take a step back and maybe think about it on a theoretical level, what are we aiming to be included in? And I think when that question came up for education, we were fighting to be included in desegregated schools. We were fighting to be included in um, public institutions of higher education, in colleges. We were fighting to be included in boards. And I think, just to be frank, I come from a tradition where Black people said, I don't think this system was ever built for us to be properly included. So we have to find an alternative way of living. We have to find alternative value systems. We have to think more collectively instead of thinking like individuals, which is what you get if you are included in Wall Street. So I think we have to redefine for ourselves what exactly is our ultimate vision of liberation, because people have different ideas. You know, people like Malcolm X and Fred Hampton, they believed in revolutionary socialism. They don't want to be included in America. They wanted to, I should say, in its government institutions, they wanted to transform it and have something that actually allowed everybody to thrive. And so I think, to make it contemporary in terms of what we should actually do, yes, we know affirmative action is an issue, but how can we look at our local communities to make sure that we have Black power? I think that is probably more important, is for people to have power, people who care about the working class, people who care about those who have who are in duress, under poverty. I think it's important that those people have power, that we have municipal power, that we have state power in some ways. And then I think that idea of inclusion kind of goes by the wayside, because of course you're going to lift people up if you see yourself in them, if you are committed to justice. Instead of asking for, you know, certain corporate boards who care more about lining their profits, whether they can include us, we're saying, hey, here's a different way of running a business, and everybody can be included in that. I know that's probably maybe a little bit more abstract than you were thinking. That's kind of where my brain went.
Yeah, no, because I appreciate that, because I think also in this moment where we see such um, sort of this labor movement and demands for workplace democracy, not only for fair pay and scheduling and wages, but also culture, right? People having the ability to be free and not exploited, right? And also wanting to a share in those profits that have been the top of mind for these business leaders. And so I think, to your point, yeah, I totally agree. And I think even now, as we see this moment, and a lot of us have been coming out of this sort of post-COVID with this labor movement moment, is this an opportunity now to actually rewrite the rules? You know, where we can now reimagine labor policies where workers have more power and more seat at the table. And I'll say to you, you know, as a new leader of Dēmos, I'm 2.5 years in, but so I maybe can't say new anymore, but I think, you know, my clarity on this is we cannot build the multiracial democracy or economy without shifting who has the power. And oftentimes when I've talked to people in philanthropy or others in the movement, like they get it. They understand, the folks in the movement know it is about power at the end of the day. But I think others who are part of these systems get very nervous and clutch pearls when we talk about shifting power to the people. Because again, we know who's in control in making the decision. So how do we do that shift, right? Will capitalism afford or allow a shift to the people?
Yeah, I would say ultimately no. I do think that we can have reforms under capitalism, and that is something that we should continue to aim for. So, for instance, if we, like I noted, if you look at some possibilities around municipal laws or state laws, where you have legislators who are trying to empower community land trusts. If you look at, there are some congressional laws, some US laws, I should say, federal laws that we can be changing around the Fair Cloth Amendment. so that we can get public housing. Right now, you cannot have a net increase of public housing without also eliminating a public housing unit. I don't think most people know that. We cannot have a net increase in public housing projects in this country because of something called the Faircloth Amendment. So people have been asking to repeal that so that we can begin to invest in a supply side public housing and not just giving things to developers and Section 8 vouchers and privatizing housing. So I think there are many ways that we can make lives easier for people. And I think we absolutely should be doing that. I think the key difference with this book and why, it's probably not like a lot of books out there on the market, is that I'm saying, okay, let's do that, but what else? What's a vision beyond that? Because all we have been fighting for are reforms, and we just keep kind of going back and forth depending on who's in power. But unless we get more of our people, radical thinkers in office who care about our folks, we're going to keep having this kind of tennis ball situation where we get a law and then it gets repealed and we get you know what I mean? It just keeps going back and forth without true progress.
That's absolutely right. And I'm going to take this opportunity to invite our Director of Economic Justice, Udochi Onwubiko, who can join us in this conversation. I mean, as she comes in, I just want to underscore your point, is that this is where the economy and the democracy are so interconnected. We oftentimes have the economic conversation over here, and then we talk about democracy over here. But in order for us to actually be able to control, it comes to political power, to your point, right? Is that who are we who is sitting in those seats of decision making to actually be able to influence the systems, and particularly the economic systems. So welcome, Udochi, to this conversation. And I know you've been listening in, and I'm just really excited to have you on the team, working with us, and your background in labor and wages, and at the federal level, working in the White House. And so just you come on in the room, as Tabitha Brown would say, come on in the room, and help us think about this. And what was your take on this, as you've been listening to the conversation, but also having read the book? What is resonating for you as you think about our economic justice work and how it is connected and interconnected with our democracy work, but also in terms of the reforms that are needed to build this inclusive economy?
So great to be with you. So I'll first say this is an amazing book. I was listening to it on audiobook. So Malaika, I know you read it. So it was really great to, Jenna, just hear your voice. And there were several times I was like laughing out loud in my apartment alone. So it's a really great read. And I've been in this space for a very long time. And your analogies, I think, are so important, because it's sometimes, I think, a little bit daunting for folks to think in the weeds and think technically about like what we need to do to change where we are, because it's so much, right? And we're so far from where we need to be. But I think it's getting back to what you said kind of at the top, like just questioning this relationship, questioning and thinking about there might be other options, right? And I think that first step is a big step for a lot of people, questioning if this is working for them. So that's something that I just really appreciated, because I think it was accessible. It like resonated with me. There are a lot of references that I, again, just LOL'd and really enjoyed. So I just want to say that I just really enjoyed that part. And there's something that I really love this analogy to relationships and making sure things work for you. So one thing that I'm really focused on at Dēmos is this idea of economic security. And I think that's something we hear about and we talk about, like, what does that actually mean? So, if you're in a relationship, you need your needs met, right? Like, you expect to come into a relationship and have your basic needs met. And that doesn't mean, is there an absence of terrible relationships? It's like, are you actually getting your needs met, right? And I think it's telling that some of the chapters in your book, we're talking about our basic needs, healthcare, housing. We're struggling with just getting by, right? just the basics of, can we wake up and expect to be okay from day to day, right? And that is troubling. And I appreciate that we need to be having those conversations, but I look forward to the day when we can say, okay, what does thriving look like? How do we make sure everyone's thriving? And that is our value. That is our definition of security. It's not just, can I meet my cost of living? Can I like buy groceries? But like, can I save? Can I take a vacation with my family? How long? Where can I go? How many plane rides can I afford this year? Like, what is our framework and our idea for like, what does security mean in this country? And I think if people ask themselves that question, it'll become very clear that what we're doing now is not working. It's not it, right?
Absolutely. And it reminds me of, Taifa, I didn't know if you had a question after that, but I just wanted to mention this because it reminded me of that poor girl who was on Twitter and went viral. And I think she has a husband and maybe like 3 kids or something like that, or 2 kids. And she had like a couple $100, she said, left over after she paid the mortgage. And we have just been, I think, so tortured in this country that we believe having a couple $100 after being able to pay for your housing makes you secure and comfortable in life. And that's not how we thrive. So, we have been brainwashed in a way because people were clowning this girl. So how can we not just change the system, but change our mindset and our values around what comfort should look like and who deserves it? We all deserve to be able to just go to the park. We deserve to be in green space. We deserve to hang out. We deserve to do nothing. Can't we just do nothing? Can't we just nap sometimes? That should be the next book. We all deserve to sleep. Just sleep.
I love it. I love it. But I think to your point is that we have been brainwashed to sort of embrace the scarcity and austerity mindset and who is deserving of being able to go on the vacation and and I think that's where we have to really create a different values construct in this country and in our economy. And so again, can we, and this is again something I mentioned at our team at Dēmos, we know that there are reforms, like you said, that we can tweak around the edges and really make a difference. But at the end of the day, what does transformation really look like? And Dēmos has tried to offer ideas around co-governance, making sure, people have a seat at the table to actually govern and make the decisions so that they can be the benefactors and beneficiaries of those decisions. We've also talked a little bit about like, how can we reimagine what public goods look like in this country? Because again, if we think about healthcare and childcare and education and all these things as a public good, we would invest in them differently. And then they would not be the thing in a monthly budget that, someone who is struggling to get to the middle class has a different, challenge in getting that public good. So I think, again, having us rethink about those shared resources and shared goods that we all should have and enjoy is a part of the mindset shift.
And if you don't mind, Taifa, I just want to, there are 2 things that come to mind is that mind shift thing. It's a mind shift on how we walk around in life with all this internalized capitalism of like, hashtag always working, and the fact that we feel like we need to be so productive. Like there's all these self-help books on how to manage your time, but where's the self-help book on like, how do I reclaim my time from work or ensure that I can spend more time? Like, I don't need people to tell me how to spend my very limited time. I need you to help me figure out how to get more time for myself. So like, even just the way that we think about how we interact with work, how we interact with our lives, the way that we talk about certain issues. So like the idea of unskilled work, the idea that there's a skilled labor force, an unskilled labor force, or low skilled and high skilled. Like that's embedded capitalism. Like there is a dichotomy that is created to convince people that there are certain people whose labor is and should be undervalued. And guess what? Those people are predominantly Black and brown folks, right? And just like the insidious ways that capitalism just creeps into our vocabulary, into our corners of our mind, and how, as a public, we need to reconsider that, but how it's so important for decision makers to also have that mindset change. Because I think what I thought was also very interesting is the way in which our government has decided to create the rules of the road. And if they're working through a prism of um, not that equity, ensuring people are making ends meet, making sure we have an economy that works for everybody, we're always going to end up in the wrong place, right? If there's not a mind shift of what our economy is supposed to be doing for folks, like how do we get to where we need to go?
Agreed. Malaika, did you have a thing you wanted to respond to that on that?
Yes. I think about just a lot of the work of revolutionaries who knew that changing our consciousness was key to our liberation, and if we believe that there aren't any other options for us, we're not going to fight for those other options. And so I like to make a distinction between like big C capitalism and little c capitalism, where the former is like the technical definition that I break down in the book. But then little c capitalism is the value system that we have. It's the belief that you have to, as the man of the house, like you're the one who have to go out and grind and you got to work multiple jobs in order to survive. We conflate manliness, we conflate patriarchy with being able to survive in capitalism, to be the boss. It pays the cost to be the boss. We want all women to be girl bosses, but not fairer bosses. We're talking about them becoming billionaires and running, being titans of industry. So we have all these value assignments that we place in a capitalist system that isn't necessarily capitalism per se, where we're consumerists. We believe in having like the biggest, fanciest car. So those are all the things that we have to disentangle in order for us, I think, to embrace another system.
Absolutely. I mean, Udochi, as you think about the shift, the shift that is needed, as you were talking a little bit about the mindset, is there anything else that's sitting with you? Because I think, as we think about federal versus state policy interventions for our economy, I also wonder, what is the political will and how do we move it and shift it? Ultimately. So just want to talk to both of you, like what does political will look like in this moment and how do we push on that? You're muted, Udochi.
I can't remember if Malaika or you or Taifa said it, but I think one important thing to think about is, do we have a government that represents us? And I think until we have a government that truly represents the people, what political will looks like or means feels like the wrong question. Because if we have if the public, and there's a lot of policies out there that would make people better off, that the public is overwhelmingly supportive, and politicians, decision makers just like aren't doing that. And is it political will, or is it kind of some things that Malaika was talking about in her book, that there is money in politics, or there's issues with how do we actually make sure that the will of the people is seen in policy and the way that we govern and the way that we make things work for people. So it feels like, at least at the national level, it feels like the political will question just feels heavy, and it feels like we ever kind of get there. But I think there's so many great grassroots folks doing things at the local, state, and regional level that it gives me hope. It gives me just a really great sense of things where we'll get better. Malika, you had some really great examples in your book about some of the policies that we think about and talk about, like happened first in Wisconsin, and how that like was the roadmap for how the federal government eventually got to some of its landmark laws during the New Deal era. So I think if we continue to support and to ensure that the folks at the ground who like know their needs and know what they need have the ability to organize, the ability to be seen and be heard, and then we empower them, I think that gets us a lot farther than it takes us very far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hate to sound like I'm putting so much individual responsibility on people in a book about systems change and the problem with a system. But I think we need to make sure we're electing people who represent us. So we tend to elect folks who align with our tribe. Somebody's a Democrat or they're a Republican. We have a two-party system, kind of whatever they say goes, you know? So if we just want to uh, participate in the political system, it looks like just going with your tribe. But what are some, if you're looking at, I think on a local level especially, who are some people who are outside of your party establishment? Who are people who are actually going to go against the grain? This is a two-party system that we have had for hundreds of years. Who is actually going to go against the grain of that political establishment to fight for what you believe in a place like New York, again, where I spent my time organizing and working as a public policy attorney, that party machine is so stringent. You know, if you are an upstart candidate, if you are an insurgent, it's extremely hard to break in. So folks need to start looking at the boring stuff. We have to look at campaign finance law. We have to figure out how we can get new blood in these positions and how they can actually get on a ballot. How can we fundraise for them? Are they going to be going up against people who have millions and maybe billions of dollars in campaign ads and all these kinds of things to support them? And so instead of just looking along party lines and being tribalist, we have to look at people who actually reflect what we believe in. Because it's hard once they're in office and they're entrenched to then say, well, I'm going to try and hold them accountable, because at that point, they're accountable to their donors. At that point, they're accountable to party leadership and they don't want to get outside of the grain. And so partisan politics incentivizes staying in line when the world is out of line. Things are out of whack and people are still trying to toe the party line, and we can't afford that. So I think looking at campaign finance, I think finding ways to your point, Udochi, is looking at people who reflect our values and actually looking at their policies and not just saying, oh, it's a black face, so let me support them. Look at what they're actually doing for us. So I think we have some work to do there.
I'm so glad you said that, because I think also as we try to address the reality and the feasibility of our advocacy, and the ideas that we're bringing forward, like you have tons of solutions in the book around addressing debt and homelessness and, you know, cooperatives and other ways that we can create shared resources and shared power. The question of the day still is, how do we dismantle like the corporations who have this power, and is showing up in our workplaces, is showing up in our Supreme Court. And so there's a lot of people who are disheartened about the ability for the people to actually influence and control, given we don't have the kind of economic and political power. And so I think, to your point, starting small, right? Starting in those, like, where are those policy interventions? And again, Dēmos has historically done work on money and politics, and we're rebuilding our programs and reimagining in this next 5 years, like, what is the core work that we need to do to actually build political and economic power? And we have to address money and politics. Not only, you know, small donor democracy and actually campaign finance reform, but also how it shows up in things like Build Back Better. You know, we wrote a joint report a couple of years ago with People's Action, and we showed how corporations undermine the will of the people by lobbying against Build Back Better, when it had a host of interventions that we thought would be great for solving the problems of the day, but no. So again, you know, I think keeping the hope in a system that, like you said, Malaika, that creates the kind of hopelessness that people think that this is just the way it is, and if it doesn't trickle down, then it's not meant to be. We're not worthy to have it. Those are the kind of that's what we have to push against. And I think for us, as we think about how to leverage our communications and narrative work, I used to laugh at like everybody's talking about narrative, but as a journalist, how do we change the story? How do we tell a different story? And this meta narrative that comes from, sort of the conservative right, that government is wasteful, government is a problem, people have their own personal responsibility to be able to achieve, and so get government out of the people's business. Like all of those are frames that are keeping us stuck. And so again, what is our counter message? And you've named it in this book, in a host of different ways, changing our mindset around capitalism and what it is doing and how it is, as you said, gaslighting us. But then I think pushing and advocating for better. And I think that's the collective work of all of us. And I really appreciate you, bringing forward your former, public policy hat and activism hat into your role now as a journalist, and being one who can help educate and inform in a way that I think cuts through. And like Udochi said, is very accessible, and shows us what's possible. And I think that's the work that we have to do today, is show what's possible.
Absolutely. And thank you. And, under capitalism, we got 20,000 different jobs sometimes. And so a part of my work was actually, when I was working for the New York City Council, was being on the comms committee of a new commission that was being formed. So I had to wear multiple hats and think about these laws, these very, it's just very technical language that we have around land use and civilian review boards and all kinds of things in New York City, and translate it into tweets, translate it into IG, and do we use Instagram? Translate it into Instagram videos. And so I think that's really what I love about the book, is that I was able to use these visuals and just use very plain language to just get the message across to people, because everybody's not trying to read real technical laws and policy, even though it's in there. I get into the theory, but we have to introduce it and package it in a way where everyday people can understand. Because if you just talk about surplus value, people are like, what does that even mean? So I'm glad you recognize that. Thank you.
No, thank you. Udochi, what are I know we're getting up on this hour. How do you want to close? What are some of the things you want to leave for the people or in our conversation? What do you want to rest on the table in terms of ideas and thoughts?
Yeah, I think I just want to get back to kind of where we started with, like, let's dream big and let's think about, like, what can this be? What can we have for ourselves and our economy? And where do we reclaim the power to shape it into what we want it and need it to be, right? And I think, again, what I love so much about your book is laying out where we are, why we're here, making it accessible, making it funny, but also like providing the solution, providing that hope, providing that pathway, so it doesn't feel daunting. It doesn't feel like, oh, we're just stuck here. It's going to suck forever. Like I came away feeling very much, yeah, things aren't great, guys, but we can do better. And we just need to think about what our next steps are and how that looks. So I appreciate it.
And Malaika, what do you want to see happen as a result of this piece that you put in the world that is, again, so accessible? And, how do you see it sort of taking off in terms of more ways that you can get in the hands of the everyday people or activists or anybody to help take this platform that you put in here around, kicking capitalism to the curb and finding this new boo of sort of socialism and socialist thought in solving some of these big problems that you've laid out? What's your hope?
My hope is that people act on their anger and frustration in healthy and productive ways. I think we know in this virtual room how I think depressed and hopeless a lot of folks feel, where there seems to be a lot of a lot of forces, policy-wise, culturally, the manosphere, the doom and gloom that we see all over the world, that is keeping people from feeling like there's a sense of community, from feeling like there are any other options. And Martin Luther King has that quote that everybody talks about: the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice. It can, but we have to be welders. We actually have to put in the work. We have to make the connections. We have to piece things together. And so for the people who are in this policy space, like you all, on a regular basis, I think conversations like these are so critical, because y'all could easily be. I mean, we could watch the Beyonce album or the movie a million times, but we're also balancing that out with other work. And so I think we have to honestly limit some of our distractions so that we have the energy to do this work. So I'm hoping that folks in activist spaces can get a hold of it and tell their friends. It's Christmas time, it's Kwanzaa. I hope you can gift it to somebody who might be socialist curious. I call it socialish because they may not be all the way socialist. That you can share it with somebody, that you can have conversations, and that you join an organization, that you join a movement. So many of our forebears, our forefathers and mothers, they were in organizing spaces, even in social environments, at church, at a local community hall. People were still finding ways to organize. And so I think we have to get back to that tradition, because again, that moral arc is not going to bend without us doing the bending.
I could not have said that any more perfectly. And I think in this moment, as we approach a presidential election cycle, where there are a host of things on the line. And I know that there are a lot of things going on this globe that is influencing people's decisions about how they will show up, if they will show up, and why they will show up. But at the end of the day, I think, to your point, we have to continue to dream. We have to continue to push and demand for change. And we are not going to accomplish or realize the dream by sitting it out. And I love this quote that Ibram Kendi said, like, the sideline of our struggle. There is no sideline to our struggle. We are either anti-racist or we are not, and I think for all of us, whether we're an activist or a policy or, a policy analyst or a journalist or a philanthropist or donor advisor, a program officer, like, all of us have a role to play in remaking and reshaping the society that we, propose and believe that's possible, right? And it's one that we can truly have freedom and liberation for everyone, not just those who have deep pockets and resources, right? And so I think for us is, how do we work together? As a think tank, Dēmos is, that means we work on research and ideas, and we analyze policy, and we try to provide counter alternatives. But we know we can't do that work absent movement. We cannot do that work without this civic engagement, like organizations and people on the ground knocking the doors to actually move people, not just to show up to elect their person, but to be involved in these solutions and ideas and demand them from those who are making decisions. So it's going to take all of us at the end of the day, like you said, Malaika, to actually quit capitalism and move to a solution and ideas that are really going to be about building shared power, shared resources, and the ability for everyone to be able to live free in this country. So I just want to thank you for your labor of putting this together and your anger that brought this together. And I think, again, all of us need to have that same righteous indignation that we need change. We need it yesterday. And that 2024 is a critical moment in this history. And I want our generations that follow us to look back on this moment and say we did the right thing for them. So with that, Malaika Jabali, thank you so much for your work. Udochi, Onwubiko, thank you for your work. And thanks to all of you for joining us tonight for this Dēmos Fireside Chat. We look forward to joining you another time. Thank you so much.